So here's my kettle, and you can see the elements in it are perfectly clean. I've been using this for well over a year with filtered water with next to zero limescale build-up. And here's my water filter granules, just drained off the salt water, put them in a bowl. I'm going to pop them in the oven about 100 degrees C and dry them out basically. So my carbon resin filtration granules have come out of the oven. I had them in the oven for 2.5 hours at about 100 degrees C. I've only got an old oven, so I can't measure the temperature very accurately, but it was around about 100. And they've come out nice and dry. You can tell they're dry when they move about in the bowl freely, and they're still sticking together, and they've still got moisture in them. So what happens at just over 100 degrees C is the moisture in there and the water molecules are boiling and changing to a gas state and leaving the carbon atoms and evaporating basically. So that's how it dries out. The white stuff around the outside you can see is salt crystals, and the salt is evaporated from the carbon and the resin and stuck around the edge of the bowl basically. It's only salt, you could reuse that, put it back into a bowl and then use it again for another saline solution. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to put the granules, I'm going to call them granules from now on, of course I'm referring to the carbon resin mixture. I'm going to put the granules into a little filter I made and then filter some more salt water solution through it. And I suggest that you actually dry the carbon out first and then pass the salt solution through it, because most of the salt evaporates in the oven, and I'm not sure the correct process. Ideally, of course, you would dry the carbon out separately and pass salt water through the resin as separate processes, i.e. heat the carbon up and pass the salt through the resin separately. And but they're mixed together, so I can't separate them out, so I've done them both together, so I don't suppose it's doing it any harm. But anyway, let's show you the water filter. So that's my water filter basically. It's nothing amazingly ingenious about it. What I've done is I've taken an old plastic bottle and I've cut the bottom off it. So it looks like that, and there's the bottom of the plastic bottle. Just cut it off with a kitchen knife again. You could do it with a reasonably sharp pair of scissors. When you cut the plastic, cut around the edge rather than trying to go through the bottom, because the bottom of a plastic bottle is very tough plastic, very hard, and you'll have a job getting a knife through it. So cut around the edge. So I just made an opening on that end, and then on this end. So what I did was I just took the bottle, okay, cut the top off it so I can put stuff inside it, and then I took the cap, I just took the cap and cut the centre of the cap out. It's just the top of the bottle that screws on the bottle. It's just the cap, but I cut a hole in it. And the reason I did that is I took a bit of fabric. It needs to be quite fine gauze fabric. This is an old sheet, which is ideal, or you could use a bit of t-shirt, or you could buy some gauze specifically for the purpose, but they all do the job. And I've just taken the bottle top, put the square piece of sheet that I cut off an old sheet I've got lying about. It's quite clean, by the way. You want to make sure it's reasonably clean, the fabric you use. Obviously you're going to be filtering water through it. And then I just took the cap that I cut a hole in, and I've screwed the cap back on quite tight over the fabric, so you've got a nice tight bit of fabric now. So what happens is when you put water in there, the debris from the water filter is caught there, but the fabric allows the water to pour through. Well, this is now my water filter. When I've loaded it up with granules, I'll show the water pouring through it. Interesting to note, by the way, the spoon I used to stir the saline solution that had boiling water in it was silver plated, and the filter, being so effective, has scavenged the silver, started to tarnish the silver and take the silver plate off. So stainless steel, use a stainless steel spoon would be better so you don't wreck your mum's cutlery. And if you take the size of a water filter and compare it next to that, you can see that the water filter is quite small, so I'm not going to need a whole lot of granules in there. I'm going to fill it up to about the first line on the bottle, so I'll have about maybe a third of the bottle with granules in it, and the rest of it's going to be just a chamber to fill up with water basically, and the water can then flow through. I'm going to catch the filtered water coming out of that end. I'm just going to start putting some granules, which are now dried out, into my freshly made water filter. Of course you'll get little granules everywhere while you're doing this, but try and be careful. Doesn't matter if you get the odd salt crystal in there, because that will filter through anyway. Eventually it will just dissolve and filter through. And don't worry about putting too much in, because you can just repeat the process and use the granules again over and over basically. If you read the PDF, the DOWEX PDF in the description below, you'll see that the resin and the carbon can be reused many times over years, as it says in the PDF. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So my resin, I'll just finish that and I'll get back to you. So there's my filter, and that's about it basically. That's almost all the granules. I'm going to take what's left in the bottom, which is mostly fine granules of resin, and mix it back up with the salt crystals which got stuck to the side of the bowl in the oven, and I'm going to pass a saline solution back through it just to make sure that all the resin, the ion exchange resin, is activated, and then it'll be good to go. And the other thing you can do is you can use, if you use carbon and resin separately, you can build up layers of carbon and resin to make sure that the water definitely passes through all the carbon and then definitely passes through all the resin. While it's mixed up like that in a, well, mixture for want of a better word, when it's mixed up like that, the water could pass through and maybe not so effectively definitely pass through all of the carbon and all of the resin. So you can build it up in layers, and not just one layer, you could make multiple layers as well. So you'd filter the water several times through one load, you know, through one vessel. I'll show you what I mean. Wash a couple of loads of clear water through it, which washes the salt out of it, obviously not out of the resin molecules, so the water tastes nice again. And there's your water filter. Doesn't look like a lot of filtered particles, but that's about 4 times the amount you'd find in a filter, a kettle filter. So you could have it so you had a layer of carbon, then a layer of resin, then another layer of carbon and another layer of resin, and you'd be filtering the same water through resin, carbon, carbon. You'd be filtering the same water twice as much through one filter load. And you don't have to use a plastic bottle either. Well, this interesting contraption is the tube off a mastic gun. It was actually a tube of hard as nails. Cut the stopper out of it, and now it's just a tube with a hole in the end, which will be an ideal water filter. You can just fill up the end of that with carbon granules and ion resin, and then you've got a perfect little water filter tube. Just put something over the end to make sure it'll catch the granules so they don't fall out, and put that over a bottle or a container. Perfect. So there's lots of different things you could use to make your water filter. As you can see, there's my take two. Okay, so I had my blah 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 engage mind before I engage mouth. So what I'm going to do next is get a few hours sleep. No, apart from that, what I've done is I took the cap. Oops, camera's just doing a floppy bit on its own, but that's good enough to do the job. Well,